On March 14, 2014, John Massengale and Victor Dover made a short presentation at the Regional Plan Association to lead off a discussion about Vision Zero and street design. A small group of people from the RPA, Transportation Alternatives, the New York City Department of Transportation, other representatives from the city government, and key people thinking about the Vision Zero campaign in New York City met for a roundtable discussion. John Massengale started the presentation, followed by Victor Dover.
We live in exciting times. Our new mayor and our new DOT commissioner have pledged to reduce traffic fatalities in New York City to zero within 10 years. This Vision Zero pledge will change the way we make our streets. The end result will not only be fewer deaths. For reasons we'll discuss, Vision Zero will help us to design and build more walkable streets. Victor and I decided to write this book because there are so many exciting new things happening in street design. We've both been designing streets for decades. We first worked together 20 years ago, and we've each witnessed how the pace of change has dramatically picked up the last several years. Of course, some of the most exciting things are happening right here in New York City. There's a saying that in my book, so-and-so is a hero. And in fact, in street design, we call former DOT Commissioner Jeanette Sadiq-Khan our hero. And she would be a hero in our book even if she had done nothing more than send a crew out overnight to change a big chunk of the roadbed at Broadway and Madison Square into the plaza you see here. But of course she did much more than that. All DOTs have enormous control over our streets, and Sadiq Khan was one of the first DOT commissioners in the country to say, I'm going to use this control for the good of the pedestrian instead of the good of the car. Now we have a new mayor, a new DOT commissioner, and the Vision Zero pledge. Vision Zero tells us there are only two ways to move to zero traffic deaths. Either separate the people from the cars or slow the cars down. Nothing else will get you to zero. That means, as Commissioner Trottenberg has said, that we're going to have to change our behavior, including the way we drive in the city and the way we design our city streets. That means a political discussion, and of course those can be difficult. But that also means that our city streets can get better and more walkable, and that is what most New Yorkers want. To understand where we might go, it's interesting to look back 100 years. I don't think we want to go back to the way things were then, but since we've all grown up in the age of the automobile, it's valuable to see what life was like before what some now call organized motordom changed our cities and our city streets. Organized motordom is the name we use to describe the coalition of car companies, oil companies, and other groups like the brand new American Automobile Association. All these groups wanted to increase automobile sales and automobile use, and they realized that wouldn't happen unless they could change the way cars operated in cities, so that cars could quickly and easily go from point A to point B. This wonderful photo shows Broadway in 1908, looking north from the elevated subway platform at Herald Square, towards Times Square. You can see that most people in the photograph are over on the sidewalk, but that they seem very comfortable stepping out into the street. Out in the middle of the street are the cable cars that ran up and down Broadway, and people comfortably wait there in the street to get on the cable cars as cable cars, and horseless carriages flow all around them. And here's a great film clip, shot from the front of one of the cable cars. It begins underneath the elevated subway tracks and runs north along the exact same stretch of Broadway in Herald Square. Over on the right, you can see the New York Herald building, designed by McKim White. In the photograph I just showed, and in this clip, you can see that there are no stoplights, stop signs, traffic signs, or striping anywhere on the road. Most of the pedestrians do stay over in the sidewalk, but you can also see that organized motordom had not yet invented the word or the concept of jaywalking, or made jaywalking a legal offense in cities across the country. This drawing of Fifth Avenue in Midtown, taken from the New York Times, shows that just 1 year later, organized motordom, sort of like the all-powerful bike lobby, only powerful, managed to get the sidewalks cut down from 60 feet to 45 feet, making the new roadway 10 feet wider than the sidewalks, when it had previously been 20 feet narrower. And we were off to the races. For the next 100 years, we gave more and more space in the city to the automobile at the expense of the pedestrian. The space between the buildings had been where public life took place, but now the space between the sidewalks became transportation corridors, and the job of the new profession of the traffic engineer was to make the traffic flow as smoothly and quickly as water in a pipe. Over time, a lot of these pipes became what we call auto sewers, particularly new roads built in the suburbs without sidewalks. But a lot of the same suburban-style design philosophies were brought into city streets, even Manhattan streets, where 80% of the residents don't own cars. Manhattan and the outer boroughs got many suburban-style arterials designed to get suburbanites quickly and easily in and out of the city. Many of these are also the roads where the most fatalities take place, because the engineers successfully use techniques like wider traffic lanes and one-way streets to make the traffic flow faster. And on city streets, you cannot make the separation of cars and people that Vision Zero advocates for streets with fast-flowing traffic. On suburban and exurban streets, engineers can minimize the impediments to smooth traffic flow. They refer to trees as fixed hazardous objects, FHOs, and restrict them whenever possible to what they call the vegetative containment zone, away from the edge of the arterial. Pedestrians are MHOs, moving hazardous objects, and the best practice also recommends moving them as far as possible from the edge of the road. When I was a kid, Manhattan's avenues were all two-way. Now, of course, they are mainly one-way. These two photos of Lexington Avenue at 89th Street, taken almost 100 years apart, show how much of the public realm has been lost to traffic flow. When you look closely and see that the buildings on the left lost large light wells as well as their stoops, you realize that the situation was even worse than you first thought. And your first thought was probably something like, wow. The owners of the houses may have gotten on the new one-way arterials and moved out to the suburbs themselves. Because who wants to live on an auto sewer? But we're so used to walking alongside these auto sewers that here in America's most walkable city, we accept the dominance of the car as normal. An irony is that the busiest subway line in America runs underneath this street, and the best commuter rail lines are 1 block away under Park Avenue. We don't need the car the way that most of America does. By the way, the bottom picture in the previous slide of Lexington Avenue was taken while the East Side IRT subway was under construction. That's why the sidewalk was made with boards and there were no street lamps or trees. In this photo of Lexington, okay, that's not Lexington Avenue, but the slide makes a point, which is this. In the 20th century, we brought suburban traffic flow techniques into the city. In the 21st century, we are bringing suburban traffic calming techniques into the city. And the new calming techniques are just as inappropriate for urban life as most of the traffic flow techniques were. This is East 4th Street in Long Beach, California. Long Beach is sometimes called the Brooklyn of Los Angeles. It's a medium-sized city with a real downtown and a wonderful climate for biking and walking. Long Beach has put a lot of work into new bike lanes, but you can see that work has not gone into making walkable streets. This is a suburban-style, one-way arterial in the center of the city. It's a transportation corridor for moving cars in and out of Long Beach, now with a bicycle lane added. But the way that lane was added is a compromise between the desire to move cars and the desire to keep cyclists safe. It's a bike lane about throughput, and it's not a bike lane that's safe for children. Here's another view of East 4th. You don't see quite as far down the long straight street because the new light rail 1 long block away is obstructing the view. But you can see that this is a place to park cars, although not a place where people want to get out of their cars and walk. The sidewalk is an afterthought, and is narrow and crowded with things like fire hydrants. Most of all, the space between the buildings has been cut up for the convenience and safety of the moving car, so that the car can move quickly through the city. It is an ugly place scaled to the needs of speeding cars. Like the suburban complete street in Florida, this street clearly tells humans that they should stay over there by the side of the road, where the view is not very nice. And here's the real Brooklyn. This is a place where people want to be. It's human scaled, it's beautiful, and no one has visually segregated the center of the public realm for automobile use only. Before we move on to the roundtable discussion, we'd like to make a few quick points that may be relevant later on. We criticize the bike lanes in Long Beach, so what are some better ways to integrate bicycles into more harmonious and hospitable places? In Paris, they took half of this very busy arterial on the left bank and made it into a shared lane for buses, taxis, and bicycles only. Cars have to stay on the other side. You wouldn't want your 11-year-old to ride here, but it's great for the man or the woman in Lycra. It also keeps the space between the buildings as a great public space where people want to stroll and dine. It doesn't look very busy in this photo, but this is a high-volume arterial on the right bank of Paris. In fact, the arterial would look better if there were more cars on it. But this simple concrete strip that separates the bike lane from the road keeps the rider safe from the traffic without the heavy-handed, over-engineered infrastructure of Long Beach. Here's a cycle lane in Paris that's safe for children. It's also a harmonious part of a very beautiful street where once again people want to be. We travel to Paris to walk along beautiful streets like this. Here's a bike lane in Berlin that combines the sidewalk and the lane and separates both from the street with trees. Germany has thousands of miles of lanes like this that they've combined into citywide networks safe for children to ride on. Low traffic, slow speed, narrow streets can be safe and comfortable sharrows. When I ride around Greenwich Village, the sharrow going north and west 4th Street is more comfortable than the bike lane going south on the parallel Bleecker Street. Why? Because some drivers think the bike lane shows the rider should be way over on the side, and they feel the need to aggressively drive close to you to let you know that. Bike lanes like this one on Pike and Allen Streets are some of the exciting things going on here in New York. And we have a long history of bike lanes, even though we've never had many of them until the last few years. This view from 1894 shows the lanes on Ocean Parkway designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. With a little imagination, we can take new elements from the present, like the child-friendly bike lanes in Germany, and combine them with elements from the past, like the wonderful alleys Olmsted planted. There is no easier way to improve a street than with beautiful street trees that shape the street with an overhead canopy. That's the way Olmsted planted them. Today, unfortunately, DOTs around the country prefer blocks with a variety of trees, as well as trees that will never grow into a mature canopy. We devoted a section of the book to this topic, so that we can reclaim this wonderful street design tool. Look at this photo of Charleston, South Carolina, from a time when city streets were still paved with dirt. Trees were planted out in the street then because that was the best place for their long-term health. For the last few decades, however, best practice has recommended planting street trees in pots to control their roots. But we know that also keeps the fixed hazardous objects from growing large and beautiful. So what if we think outside the box? Lafayette Street is about to be rebuilt and it needs to be narrowed. Moving curbs and drains to narrow a street can add enormous expense. Thinking outside the box and combining new ideas with old, we might dig a wide trench alongside the sidewalks and put the trees out in the street. That would narrow the roadbed, save costs, and provide a protected place between the trees and the sidewalks for a cycle lane. We could also pave the bike lane with a permeable surface that would be greener and better for the trees than the asphalt we have now. Lafayette Street is a low-volume street because it's not very long. It's wide and should be two-way again, with bike lanes on each side. The new restaurants springing up on Lafayette would love that for their sidewalk tables. Or we might have a very different design, like Kensington High Street in London. Design solves problems, and we are in another period of experimentation, like 100 years ago. But we're looking for different results now than we were then. We want slower cars and better places for pedestrians and bikes. This great composite from the National Association of City Transportation Officials shows one of the most important things that happens when you slow cars down. The circle at the top represents the cone of vision of a driver going 15 miles per hour. Second from the bottom, we see the same thing at 25 miles per hour. You can see that the driver going 15 sees more than twice as much as the driver going 25. Three more important things happen when we slow the cars down. First, the driver has more time to react, more time to avoid an accident, and more chance of slowing down even below 15 miles per hour. Second, cars that are going more slowly don't kill the pedestrian if they do hit him or her. When a car going 20 miles per hour hits a pedestrian, there's a 5% chance that the pedestrian dies. At 25 miles per hour, that jumps to a 50% fatality rate, or 10 times as high. And at 30 miles per hour, 80% of the pedestrians will die. This is why slowing cars down to 20 miles per hour or less is the only solution that gets us to 0 deaths. Last but not least, when the car slows down to 20, because the driver sees so much more, we can get rid of all the striping and reflectors that give streets an anti-human scale. We can still have crosswalks and stoplights, but we can also reclaim the public realm. No one thinks we should go back to the New York City streets of 100 years ago. And Victor and I don't think we should immediately emulate a place like Amsterdam, where just as in old New York, they have very little striping and very few traffic signs and almost no stop signs or stoplights in the center city. But Amsterdammers decided back in the 1960s that they didn't like what even those small funny Dutch cars with rubber band transmissions were doing to the quality of life in Amsterdam, and they set off on a course that has led them to a wonderful urban life in which cars, bicycles, and pedestrians all share the city streets. At intersections, they look each other in the eye and negotiate who will go first. Of course, that means that cars go very slowly. So during the roundtable, we'd like to discuss what we might do here in New York on the important streets coming up for changes, like Fifth Avenue, Sixth Avenue, and Lafayette Street. Earlier this week, Community Board 2 gave preliminary approval to a heavy-duty transportation corridor solution for Lafayette Street. There are many more walkable designs that could be made for the street. Working just half a block from Lafayette, I know that local residents and workers would be interested in seeing them. This chart from the New York City DOT shows how much our streets have improved during the last 8 years. But these wide, one-way arterials will never take us to 0 deaths. For that, we need new, innovative designs that build on the DOT's recent work and go even further. The good news is that Vision Zero can lead us to new streets that are beautiful places where people want to be. 0 deaths requires slowing the cars down, and once that happens, you don't need the heavy-duty engineering that gets in the place of placemaking. And when that happens, you can have human-scaled streets where public life once again takes place in the space between the buildings. The overwhelming majority of New York residents and visitors walk. Walkable streets require urban design and placemaking as well as traffic engineering. Fifth Avenue and Lafayette Street offer perfect opportunities for imaginative new solutions that will go beyond the innovations of the last few years without the design baggage from streets designed for faster, suburban conditions. Manhattan already has enough one-way arterials. When the city made the avenues one-way in the 1950s and 60s, the avenues at the center of the island were the last to be converted from two-way. Now they should be the first to be converted back.
This is Victor Dover. As a way of testing out the conclusions we were reaching while researching and writing our book, John and I took a handful of special conditions in Manhattan and illustrated what if. We asked, how could the revolutionary changes that have been unfolding on New York streets ultimately play out on these places? This is the special segment of Bleecker between 10th and Christopher. Here, seen from above, north is up. Now, down on the ground, looking south. From the knees up, this is one of the nicest street spaces around. The slight diagonal where the grids come together results in a triangular wedge of space that is very agreeable. and this adds variety to the street pattern. But somehow, this space still feels a bit wasted on the car. From the ankles down, it's obvious the recent restriping has been successful in taking back some of that right-of-way previously devoted solely to motoring. This was big progress, but it's still auto space, in which bikes and pedestrians are tolerated, but not encouraged. However, what might it look like in an even more evolved form? What if the area striped off here was consolidated, as it was at Madison Square, and we took the next step to shape it into a really composed urban scene? Now we're looking south. In this variation, one of several, the space is now a plaza, and the whole street segment is raised. Here the traffic can still come through the narrow through lane, but now it would have to come through the plaza on the pedestrians' terms. What today is striped asphalt would be captured as really useful pedestrian space, and the cafe tables can spill out onto that space on the attached side. There are places for a monument and fountain at the end of the vistas. In the book, we catalog historic streets to make the point that a richer menu of street design options is needed, and to encourage good experimentation. A section is devoted to the Rambla or promenade street type, which have wide pedestrian promenades down the center of the streets. These streets are the principal organizing features of cities like Barcelona, where they are also the most important social spaces for the flanking neighborhoods. And then, in our chapter on retrofitted streets, we make proposals for applying the lessons in those historical examples right here. 2nd Avenue, for instance, is a route for cars moving down the island, but for people who live in that neighborhood, this is the spine of their neighborhood. This is their avenue. What if? Today, the avenue is largely dug up for the construction of the new subway line, which will bring new people to the avenue and the neighborhood. What if? What if, just for a segment or two, some wise future Vision Zero civilization made a choice to use less of that avenue for speedy through movement and took back the center for its own promenade, for walking and dining? Through movement here would be maintained, but it would be reduced. Here are the existing conditions looking south, before and after. This is a cross-section through the what-if scenario we called the Yorkville Promenade. As the Vision Zero campaign quickens in the outer boroughs, new challenges, big challenges, will await. For example, taming the boulevards. It's going to require a lot of before and after what-if thinking, visualization. The public process will require helping people visualize change before it occurs. And as you know, this always requires thinking about change over time, as the private real estate investments catch up with the street redesign. We use before and after pictures in this sort of work partly because they are easy to understand, and partly because when you leave the after image on the screen for a while, and then change it back to before, it creates a sense of urgency to do something about what is out there today. This example is from Northern Virginia, showing a strip corridor restored as a proper multi-lane, multi-way boulevard. When multi-way boulevards are done correctly, the pedestrian realm along the sidewalks next to the storefronts is extended into a slow-moving side access lane, separated from the through-going lanes by tree lines. Obviously, the last few years in New York City have been a great restart. Now, Vision Zero changes everything again, and it's time to take the effort to its next level. So much remains to be done. Let's talk about it.